Under the surface of what seemed like another tense morning in the Middle East, something changed. Not with headlines, not with breaking news tickers, but with silence. An eerie kind of silence that usually means something has already happened, something that hasn't yet made it to your phone screen but is already reshaping everything behind it. You hear a siren, a flicker in the lights, then darkness, then fire. And just like that, the illusion shatters. This isn't a drill. This isn't a border clash. This is something else, something bigger, something that even the most hardened strategists didn't see coming. Before we dive in, subscribe right now, because what you're about to hear is not just a news story, it's a turning point, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. It began with a launch, then two, then over 200. Ballistic missiles, fired directly from Iranian territory, tore across the sky and slammed into multiple critical zones in Israel, including Tel Aviv, Haifa, and Ramat Gan. The Iron Dome was activated, of course. So were David's sling and arrow systems, but they were no match. Overwhelmed, drenched, collapsing under the weight of a barrage unlike any in recent memory. Civilian infrastructure was hit, military command centers damaged. Reports emerged that the so-called Israeli Pentagon in Tel Aviv's northern sector had taken a direct hit, and not just symbolic damage, warehouses destroyed, barracks burned, power grids knocked out. In Haifa, flames engulfed areas near the port. Smoke blanketed the streets. Roads in central Tel Aviv went dead silent. Cars were abandoned mid-commute. Subways turned into bunkers. And the phone lines of Magen David Adom, Israel's emergency medical service, were flooded. Over 200 calls. Within an hour. Let that sink in. The air defense systems intercepted some of the rockets. Yes, but not nearly enough. Not enough to stop the carnage. In Ramat Gan, apartment buildings buckled. Some collapsed. The international airport, Ben Gurion, suspended all operations. Airspace over central Israel closed. For the first time in years, Israel was isolated. Panic spread like fire. Citizens scrambled. Grocery shelves emptied. Fuel stations overwhelmed. Public trust began to crack. Not because of what officials said, but because of what people could see with their own eyes. Independent sources began publishing footage that contradicted government reassurances. And slowly, reality began to bleed through the cracks. This wasn't just a random assault. This was a coordinated act of war, a demonstration of vulnerability, and a brutal exposure of a myth that Israel's skies were impenetrable. Experts began to weigh in. They pointed to the precision, the volume, the strategy. Iran, they said, hadn't just fired blindly. They had targeted with chilling accuracy. Ammunition depots, command centers, logistical hubs, places that matter. Places designed to keep Israel in control during a crisis. Gone. But what made the assault devastating wasn't just the missiles. It was the saturation. Hundreds of warheads, launched in rapid succession, from multiple directions. It wasn't just about hitting targets. It was about drowning the defense grid, overloading it. And it worked. The Iron Dome, for all its success against rockets from Gaza or Lebanon, was built to handle small waves. Not this, not ballistic missiles, not drones disguised as warheads, not decoys engineered to mislead radar. Some of the missiles, according to initial reports, might have even had hypersonic features. Israeli officials deny it, but images from Ramat Gan and Haifa tell another story. Pinpoint strikes. Structures gutted from within. A missile reportedly pierced the roof of a military fuel depot, igniting a chain reaction that caused a partial collapse. In Jaffa, another missile obliterated a regional defense headquarters. This wasn't just war. It was a test of Israel's readiness. A test, it failed. Subscribe if you haven't yet, because the next chapter is even darker. Now pause, ask yourself, where was the United States? As the sun rose over a smoking Tel Aviv, the world turned to Washington. Allies, emergency briefings, decades of security agreements. But what came wasn't support. It was silence. A carefully worded press release from the U.S. State Department, clarified that the United States was not involved in any Israeli actions against Iran. Not a word of military backing, no troop movement, no airlift, not even symbolic reassurance. President Donald Trump posted on social media, his signature platform, not to promise help, but to warn Americans to leave Tehran. The message was clear. You're on your own. It was a diplomatic earthquake. In the corridors of Jerusalem, in the bunkers beneath the Knesset, something snapped. If America wasn't coming now, when would they? Even during past operations, like Cast Lead or the Syrian strikes, there was at least a token of support. This time, nothing. Meanwhile, Iran wasn't standing alone. Yemen's Houthi rebels joined the assault. From the south, they launched what they claimed to be a hypersonic ballistic missile, allegedly of Palestinian origin, toward Israeli targets. In a chilling broadcast, the Houthi leader declared solidarity with Iran and called for global Islamic resistance against Israel. Then came Hamas. From Gaza, rockets flew toward southern Israel. Most landed in uninhabited zones, but the signal was unmistakable. Iran was no longer alone. But this wasn't just a collection of rogue actors. It was coordinated. It was multi-pronged. It was designed to overwhelm. Analysts began calling it an asymmetric war, not in the usual sense, but in something new, something terrifying. Each attack, whether successful or not, distracted resources, drained attention, and sowed chaos. And unlike nation-states, groups like Hamas and the Houthis don't operate under international law. They don't answer to diplomacy, they don't fear retaliation, and their weapons are getting smarter, deadlier, longer-ranged. Some reports suggest Iran's hand in the design of those rockets is not just financial, but technical. If this trend holds, Israel could be staring at a three-front war. Inside Israel, the conversation is shifting. Fast. Military leaders are demanding changes, immediate ones. Politicians are scrambling, some calling for harsher crackdowns on Gaza, others for preemptive strikes on Yemen. But nothing is simple anymore. Every action risks triggering a broader war. Every hesitation threatens more destruction. The Houthis and Hamas are no longer side notes. They are active players, and their entry has escalated the conflict from bilateral to regional. And still, one question remained. What about Hezbollah? In Beirut, silence. Days into the conflict, Hezbollah had not fired a single shot. Why? Theories abound. One report suggests a secret agreement between Lebanon's government and Hezbollah, brokered with French and American intermediaries, to keep Lebanon out of the war. Others claim Israel issued a brutal threat: attack us, and southern Beirut burns. Either way, the absence of Hezbollah is suspicious. Strategic? Absolutely. But temporary? Almost certainly. Behind closed doors, Hezbollah is watching, measuring, waiting. According to leaks, internal debate is raging. Some commanders push for immediate involvement, arguing that Iran and Palestine cannot stand alone. Others fear triggering a full Israeli offensive, especially with Lebanon already shattered by economic collapse. The political wing, linked to Lebanon's parliament, prefers to wait. But how long can they? Along the border, Israel isn't waiting. Troops are reinforcing positions. Drones patrol the skies. Missiles are armed. If Hezbollah strikes, the response will be swift and brutal. But if they don't, their silence may be interpreted as betrayal by Tehran, a betrayal that could fracture the so-called axis of resistance. Now ask yourself, what happens if the north erupts? Because the real threat may not be Hezbollah. It may be something else, someone else, a name you know too well, a man blamed not by enemies but by his own people, Benjamin Netanyahu. In the chaos of the last few days, a statement shook the Israeli public, not from an activist, not from the press, but from Ehud Olmert, former Prime Minister of Israel. The problem is not Iran, not Gaza, not Hezbollah. The problem is Netanyahu. Let that sink in. Olmert's words struck like a bombshell. He pointed to the October 7th border breach with Gaza. He blamed Netanyahu for Israel's lack of strategic planning, for isolating allies, for chasing PR instead of defense. And he's not alone. Protests erupted again in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. Citizens angry and afraid, demanding leadership, real leadership, because the missiles aren't just falling from the sky. They're exposing something deeper, something broken. Israel, for the first time in years, faces a war it might not be able to control, not just because of enemies on the outside, but because of fractures within. So, if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. And like this video, because what we've seen is only the beginning. And now, as the dust lingers in the air and the sirens grow quieter, not because the threat is gone, but because the system itself can no longer keep up, another layer of the crisis begins to unfold. It's not just about missiles. It's not just about politics. It's about perception, about trust, about a population looking at its leaders and wondering, do they really have a plan? Or are we all just improvising while the sky falls? Across Israel, emergency broadcasts are becoming routine. Shelters are full. Hospitals are overloaded. Electricity grids are unstable in critical areas like Haifa and Tel Aviv. Emergency generators are humming across underground bunkers. The transportation system is fractured. Metro lines suspended indefinitely. Military convoys rerouted to avoid roadblocks formed not by enemy forces, but by civilians trapped in panic. Supermarkets are being emptied. Pharmacies are overrun. And the price of basic necessities has skyrocketed overnight. There are already signs of economic disruption, stock markets reacting with sharp declines, foreign investment freezing, and international flights rerouted away from Ben Gurion as insurers refuse coverage in what they now label an active war zone. Diplomats are quietly leaving, embassies scaling back operations. The psychological impact of that cannot be overstated. For the first time in decades, the unthinkable has happened. Israel, the fortress state, has been pierced. Not once, not symbolically, but repeatedly, systemically. The idea of invulnerability has been replaced by something else, something far more dangerous. The idea that maybe, just maybe, no one is coming to help. This realization has triggered a second wave, not of missiles, but of political rupture. The Israeli public, long accustomed to existential threats, is reacting differently this time, not just with fear, but with fury, with questions, with accusations. How did this happen? Why weren't we ready? Where is the government? Where are the allies? These aren't fringe questions, they're mainstream now, echoing in newspapers, debated on live television, flooding social media. Has Israel's military doctrine become outdated? Has its leadership grown too confident in technology, too dependent on foreign alliances, too blind to shifts in regional dynamics? You begin to hear whispers, then louder claims, that what's failing isn't just the missile defense system, it's the decision-making behind it, the assumptions, the arrogance, and the refusal to adapt. Meanwhile, Iran's confidence seems to grow with each hour. Their media celebrates what they call a calibrated response. Not an all-out war, they claim, but a message, a warning. But what kind of message leaves apartment buildings in ruins and emergency workers pulling bodies from rubble? Was this really about deterrence, or was it about provocation? Is Tehran daring Israel to respond, testing how far they can go without triggering a full regional war? Or worse, are they trying to provoke that very war, betting that Israel's isolation will prevent a meaningful counterattack? It's not just Israel asking those questions. Across the Gulf, Arab nations are holding emergency meetings, officially to monitor the situation, unofficially to choose sides. Some governments remain silent, others urge restraint. But behind closed doors, they're preparing too. Oil prices are reacting. Shipping routes through the Red Sea are under scrutiny. And the specter of a wider conflict looms like a shadow no one wants to name aloud. What happens if Iran decides this wasn't enough? What if they have more? What if Syria reopens its front? What if Iraq becomes a launch pad? What if cyber attacks cripple Israeli communications and infrastructure in the coming days? Are we seeing just the kinetic phase of something far more sophisticated? An asymmetric campaign blending missiles, misinformation, and diplomatic paralysis. Because make no mistake, this war isn't being fought only with rockets. It's also unfolding online. Within hours of the first strikes, deepfake videos began to circulate, clips claiming to show the Iron Dome failing completely, fabricated messages from Israeli generals, manipulated footage of supposed American military retreat. Many were quickly debunked, but the damage was done. Fear spreads faster than fact. And in a crisis, perception is everything. Could this be part of Iran's strategy? Not just to damage infrastructure, but to damage morale, to shake the confidence of an entire nation, to create a rift between the public and their institutions, to destabilize from within. And, speaking of within, what of the Israeli military? Reports have surfaced from within IDF units describing confusion, delayed orders, miscommunication between divisions. Some reservists were called up without clear instructions. Others arrived to bases already struck by missiles. There are whispers, still unofficial, that commanders were given conflicting directives, that coordination with intelligence agencies broke down in the chaos. If true, this suggests something far worse than a tactical failure. It suggests a systemic vulnerability, a collapse not of courage but of cohesion, and that is the kind of weakness adversaries can exploit for years to come. Which brings us back to the question no one wants to ask, but everyone is now forced to consider: is Israel alone? We've talked about the U.S. silence, but what of Europe? Where are the emergency summits, the joint declarations, the naval fleets? Germany calls for de-escalation. France suggests restraint. The UK issues a vague statement of concern, but action? Nothing concrete, nothing rapid, nothing that sends the signal that Israel has international backing. Why? Is the West simply overwhelmed? Or are we witnessing the limits of moral support in a world exhausted by conflict and fractured by competing interests? And what about the broader implications? If Israel, the most militarized, defense-prepared democracy in the world, can be rocked like this, what does it mean for everyone else? For Taiwan, for South Korea, for the NATO frontier in Eastern Europe? Are we entering a new age where traditional alliances no longer guarantee protection, where defense systems once thought impenetrable crumble under volume and ingenuity? Is this the future of warfare? Fewer boots, more bots, more decoys, more saturation strikes, more gray zones? And if so, is anyone ready? Let us not forget, this is only the opening act. Hezbollah still waits in silence. Could their sudden entry tip the scale? Could another round of strikes make the north burn? Could Iran escalate further? Perhaps not with missiles, but with something even more insidious. Economic sabotage, cyber disruption, naval harassment. What happens if Iranian proxies in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon begin coordinated action? Could this spiral into a regional inferno with no clear front lines? And most chilling of all, what happens if Israel's leadership, under immense pressure, makes a move that pushes this conflict past the brink into a place where no international actor can mediate, no ceasefire can be brokered, no line can be redrawn? If you are still watching, subscribe now. Like this video. Leave a comment, because this isn't just a war report. This is a window into the next phase of geopolitical reality. And what's coming next hour, next day, next week may shake far more than one region. It may redraw the entire map of global power, and we're only just beginning to understand how deep this goes. And as the third wave of uncertainty crashes through the region, something darker begins to settle over the geopolitical landscape. Doubt. Not the kind of doubt that quietly lingers in diplomatic backchannels or internal assessments, but doubt on a national scale, doubt that creeps into military strategy rooms, doubt that pulses through financial markets, doubt that trickles down into every civilian shelter in Haifa, every blackout in Tel Aviv, every mother holding her child underground while sirens scream above. It is the kind of doubt that erodes confidence, not just in systems and institutions, but in identities. Who are we, if we are no longer untouchable? Who do we become if our shields no longer hold? And what comes next, if what's behind us already broke the rules of modern conflict? Inside Israel's military-industrial complex, crisis meetings unfold behind sealed doors. Engineers and generals alike are no longer debating how to respond, but what went wrong. Billions were poured into defense tech, layered air systems, real-time command networks. So why did they bend? Why were critical facilities, once thought hardened beyond reach, vulnerable to saturation? Could the Iron Dome, David's sling, and arrow systems simply not keep pace with the evolution of threat vectors? Or is the problem deeper? Perhaps strategic overconfidence, political interference in military planning, or the dangerous illusion that deterrence equals immunity. Even some former officials have begun whispering that the threat modeling never accounted for a coalition strike, multiple fronts, multiple systems, attacking in near-perfect sync. And now that the nightmare scenario is no longer hypothetical, the race to rethink everything begins too late. And while Israel recalibrates under fire, Tehran observes with calculated silence. No new statement, no escalation, only subtle hints that more is possible, more fronts, more proxies, more fire. But perhaps even more dangerous than what's already happened is the question Tehran leaves hanging in the air. What if this was just a warning? Not a war, not the big move, just a controlled burn to test the ceiling, to measure response time, to expose weaknesses. If so, then what happens next may not come from Tehran at all, but from their allies who now understand just how vulnerable Israel can be when stretched. Meanwhile, in Lebanon, Hezbollah's silence grows heavier by the hour. Not absence, stillness. A deliberate kind of patience. The kind that feels less like restraint and more like a decision waiting for a trigger. Border regions are tense. Drones hover overhead. Every unusual movement sparks alerts in Northern Command. But so far, nothing. Could it be that Hezbollah is calculating whether entering the fight now helps or hurts Tehran's broader plan? Or are they waiting for an Israeli misstep, an overreach, a misfire, a civilian casualty that would give them moral justification to strike without appearing as aggressors? There are rumors that logistical preparations are underway, that hidden launchers are being repositioned, that messages between southern Lebanon and Iranian intelligence are increasing. And if that's true, then this silence is not peace, it's prelude. Inside the Knesset, the political ground is also beginning to fracture. Netanyahu, once the symbol of unflinching security policy, now faces not just opposition, but rejection. Protesters rally not only for ceasefire or escalation, but for leadership change, for accountability, for someone to stand at the helm who is not reacting, but directing. But can a wartime government allow for such disruption? Or are we entering a period where civilian unrest and military mobilization happen in parallel? Opposition leaders propose a temporary unity government, stripping Netanyahu of wartime powers. Others warn such moves would only deepen the crisis, fracture command cohesion, and embolden Israel's enemies. Yet the fact that these debates are happening at all, while missiles still fly, while shelters are full, says everything about the internal pressure cooker that Israel now finds itself inside. And what of the civilian front? Tens of thousands have fled the north and the south. Schools are closed indefinitely. Airports remain shuttered. Cyber attacks continue to target banks, hospitals, and power utilities, not just to cause damage, but to erode routine, to paralyze the civilian heartbeat of the nation. In Ashkelon, entire neighborhoods sit abandoned. In Tel Aviv, apartments are dark not because they were destroyed, but because their occupants fled to the Negev or to Eilat. There are whispers that Israel's conscription system may soon expand, pulling deeper into the reserves, even as the reservist system shows signs of exhaustion. What happens when the army runs out of fresh bodies? What happens when soldiers begin asking the same questions civilians already are? Where is this going, and who is leading us there? Beyond Israel, the global response remains fractured. The UN Security Council has failed to produce consensus, even on basic humanitarian corridors, now mired in dispute. Iran, meanwhile, has turned its attention not to the West, but to the global South. Africa, Latin America, Southeast Asia, quietly reframing its actions as resistance, not aggression. And some are listening. This no longer looks like a local conflict. It's starting to resemble a realignment, where old alliances fade and new blocs emerge, which raises the question no one wants to confront. How does this end? Can it end? Or are we witnessing the start of something long, grinding, and transformative? A war not just of weapons, but of ideologies, influence, and global direction. If this was the first move in a calculated disruption of the existing world order, then the second may already be in motion, far from the battlefield, in strategy rooms, encrypted networks, and shifting alliances. And if Israel can bleed this badly, what does that mean for NATO, for the West, for the global balance of power? As the world watches, some in silence, others in alarm, the message becomes clear. The rules have changed. This isn't just about Israel. This is about everyone. And if you're not adapting, you're already falling behind. So stay with us, subscribe now, like this video, leave your thoughts in the comments, because this isn't the end of the story. It's only the beginning of something none of us can ignore.